welcome. My name is Meredith Preuss, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gordon and Marion Smith Foundation. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh people whose ancestral and unceded land we are gathered here today. I'd also like to thank Artists for Kids, whose exhibition we are now enjoying, Playhouse, on until February 26th, you heard it here first. Also, who have released a print portfolio of limited editions that you can see in the lobby. This comes from a long-standing history with Artists for Kids working with artist patrons who have donated a limited edition print as a way to raise money for Artists for Kids and the programming that they do with students in the schools in North Vancouver and beyond, bringing them into the gallery, artists in residence, camps, many incredible programs that I'm sure many of you know about already. So tonight's talk is part of the Art Education for Life speaker series. It's a 5-part series that brings together voices from diverse fields, exploring the role that art education had in shaping their journeys as artists or entrepreneurs or designers or neurologists in the case of the talk later this month. Tonight's talk features Vancouver-born and Berlin-based artist Jeremy Shaw sitting down with Andrew Booth to delve into the role that early exposure to art education had in building alternative perspectives on visual media from a young age. A former student of Artists for Kids, Shaw now works in a variety of media to create a post-documentary space to dissect and assemble disparate belief systems and counter-histories. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd also like to thank the O'Dane Foundation for their support of the series, Polygon Homes and Anthem Properties as well as sponsors, and the North Vancouver Recreation and Cultural Commission and the North Vancouver School District for their ongoing support of our programs. I'd also like to thank our wonderful volunteers tonight, many of whom are here, and our small team, Sophia Boutsakis. So I'm going to also introduce our speakers. Jeremy Shaw, who was born in North Vancouver in 1976. He works in a variety of media to explore altered states and the cultural and scientific practices that aspire to map transcendental experience, often combining and amplifying strategies of verite filmmaking, conceptual art, music videos, and scientific research. He creates a post-documentary space that complicates expectations of moving images as a form of testimony. Shaw has had solo exhibitions at Centre Pompidou in Paris, MoMA, PS1, New York, Schinkel Pavilion in Berlin, and Mona, Tasmania, and has been featured in international surveys such as the 57th Venice Biennale, the 16th Lyon Biennale, and Manifesta 11 in Zurich. In 2016, he won the prestigious Sobey Art Award, and in 2018 was artist in residence at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. Works by Shaw are held in public collections worldwide, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Centre Pompidou, Paris, the Tate Modern, London, Hamburger Bahnhof, Berlin, and the National Gallery of Canada. Andrew Booth is an avid art collector and curator of the Vancouver Art Blog, a resource dedicated to promoting and showcasing Vancouver's contemporary art scene. He's spoken on panels across Canada on demystifying the practice of collecting art, the responsibility of collectors have in acting as caretakers for an artist's works, and the joy of living with art. Andrew was born in Abbotsford and has been living in the greater Vancouver area since his teens. And he and Jeremy actually met in Berlin at Jeremy's studio, I think a year ago. Yep. And this was one of the many reasons why we thought Andrew would be a wonderful moderator for this talk, or conversant. I'm not sure what to call you. Anyways, on to the talk. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, everybody. For those in the back, if you can't hear me or Jeremy, just wave. We'll adjust the audio here for you. And of course, when we do play some video work, we'll dim the lights entirely so you can see and hear as well. And Jeremy, thanks for flying all the way to Vancouver for this talk. I know that's the only reason. Yeah. There's a helicopter idling out back when you want to leave back to Berlin. Of course, you're here. You're part of the Sobeys this year as a juror, right?
Yes.
Great. So as Meredith mentioned, the overarching theme for the speaker series is about art and education. And Jeremy's practice explores themes of altered states of consciousness and humanity's desire to achieve transcendence through a variety of methods such as spirituality, religion, music, dance, drugs, and technology. So knowing this, I was curious to explore some of the influences or circumstances in your early years or your formative years that led you to eventually explore these ideas artistically, and then also how you got to enroll into Emily Carr, art through the Artists for Kids school, and then pursuing art as a full-time career. So the talk's going to revolve around those themes. It's going to connect some of those influences to some of his work that he's produced. But to start things off, on a lighter note, I'd love to know what is your earliest memory of encountering the arts, if you can remember. You can always make it up if you don't. No one's going to know.
I'm not sure. I had a neighbor, a friend, and he was a babysitter of mine, Charles Van Sandwyk, who's actually quite a well-known illustrator in North Vancouver, from Deep Cove. He was a few houses down from us, and he used to babysit me. And so that's my first, I'm sure I have memories prior to this, but that was my first kind of acknowledgement of someone embodying, can you hear me, or is that?
Yep, keep going.
Embodying, being an artist. He was only, he's probably 10 years older than me, I would say, something like that. And he, I guess I must have been, I don't know how old, 3 or 4 or 5. And he was already, in high school and really committed to this. He was etching and doing these really incredible detailed caricatures, and he had this whole sort of make-believe land with fairies and gnomes and stuff. And so that was my first introduction to somebody who was already kind of embodying
making
art. Yeah, and really, and he really kind of nurtured my kind of entry into doing that. He was somebody I looked up to.
So let's, I guess, continue the lineage from there, because at some point, bringing it back to this institution, you actually enrolled, or you were part of the Artists for Kids program, I suppose, at a young age. Maybe can you talk about, the sort of truncated version of your journey to getting into Emily Carr? I'd love to know, what were the moments that made you realize that you wanted to pursue art in post-secondary and then subsequently as an artist?
I think, Artists for Kids, that was something that just was kind of dropped on us, really, in 12th grade. My friend Will is here. He was there with me. And yeah, that just sort of happened. They kind of chose 5 or 6 of us from each class around North Van, and then they had a mentor come in and do a workshop with you, basically. So 5 kids from my school, from Handsworth, from wherever, all the other schools, met for this week workshop, and I was there the year David Blackwood, who was actually also an etcher or printmaker from the East Coast, did a workshop with us, and we did a bunch of etchings. But to get to that, I guess I was just I was just inherently drawn to making art ever since I was very young, and that's what I was focusing on even in high school, really. By the time I was in 12th grade, I think I had 4 art classes.
And then did you go to Emily Carr immediately out of high school?
Yeah, basically right out of high school. And that was just because I thought that's what I should do. I didn't really have any knowledge of contemporary art, so to speak, or the art world or anything like this. I just thought I would keep moving on. I was also doing graffiti at the time, and so I was really and making skateboard videos. I was skateboarding, and it just seemed like the logical thing to do. I didn't know anything about New York City or any of this.
Your art world, as you knew it, was the sort of circle that you were operating in, which was a mix of skateboarding, all the sort of activities that come with that subculture, right?
Yeah, hardcore, hip-hop, skateboarding, drugs.
Just wanted to emphasize that. So maybe talk a little bit about your teenage years outside of school, some of those activities we talked about, skateboarding, partying, whatever. Because I'm going to make a connection now, and you'll see in the slideshow that's playing here. We'll probably have to start the slideshow over again in a second, but there's a thread line that goes through some of these works. I think that traces back to these formidable years. So maybe just again paint the picture of what you were up to as a young teen and going into Emily Carr, the circles that you were running in. Because I also understand that in Emily Carr you your focus wasn't necessarily on art per se. Like, what were you mostly interested in at the time that you were in Emily Carr?
Yeah, well, I went in there without a real clear. I was painting. I was, I didn't have a real clear idea of what I wanted to do with art, as I guess most people don't when they go into art school. But when I entered that school, I got kind of consumed by music, really, more than anything. And that was like, this is sort of mid-90s. So yeah, I went in there and I bought a sampler and I started. I had played music in the past as a kid. I played the bassoon and I played the guitar. But then when I went to Emily Carr, I bought a sampler and it got really involved with making electronic music, basically. And so during my time at Emily Carr, I was almost more focused on music, I think, really, than I was on making artwork. And that, yeah, I think at the time, I probably wasted a lot of time in that school. I think
it worked out.
Not really.
Here you
not
are,
really.
Standing in front.
I wasn't very committed to being there in a lot of ways. I was very into drum and bass and very into going out and.
It sounds like me right now. So this is maybe a bit of a tough question to answer now that because I understand that from your graduating class of Emily Carr, I think you're the only active artist practicing, so to speak, or that you know of.
Oh. Maybe like
professionally,
maybe that is like exhibiting frequently. I would imagine people are still practicing, but
sure, right.
maybe not. But yeah.
So how could art school better prepare? Like, I'm not making a claim that they didn't prepare you for becoming a professional artist, but what do you think art schools in post-secondary in particular can do to better prepare artists for the real world, to sustain their practice?
Maybe talk about the art world.
Yeah.
Well, truly, like I left there without any concept of like what, I don't know, an art market or what, selling art was like
the commercial side,
dirty word. Yeah, like, or maybe not, because I think some of the professors were selling art, but it was not to be spoken of, certainly at that point. And I mean, I was so naive to like what was actually going on in terms of trying to financially exist as an artist. That was really.
Do you remember what advice they gave you or what direction they pointed you in? No, none.
No, none.
Interesting. But you eventually figured it out. I don't know if it was just by accident or if you had guidance or mentors. Like, what do you think was the? How were you able to sort of push through that? Do you think was it just like naivety? Like, were you?
Somewhat, I think, like just this kind of strange. Belief that it would work out somehow, that you could make films and make a living from them, like within an art gallery context. But I met certain people along the way that gave me a kind of crash course in certain things, and friends as well. People that met people that lived in New York and London and places like this that I was visiting, and quickly kind of adapted to all of that. But so in one way, it's maybe a blessing to exist outside of that and to be educated outside of that and not have that, because to me, when I started, it started becoming a monetary thing. It was really difficult. Like I thought it was super weird. Like selling work felt really strange, and I guess that's quite nice in a way. But yeah, I think there should be some sort of medium between the two. But it's not like people who are raised in New York City that know everything about the art market as they go into it. I knew nothing, literally.
I guess that underscores the importance of like having a community, networking, collaboration. Like from those relationships, you probably learned a lot about the commercial side, or perhaps that side of the art world that maybe art school didn't provide you, or at least gave you sort of networking opportunities to find your way through. Because my follow-up question now is talking about how you eventually moved to Berlin. And I'd love if you can, and I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but how the move from Vancouver to Berlin shifted your practice, or how it shaped or evolved your practice?
Well, I think it loosened it up in a lot of ways. I think that studying in Vancouver, or kind of learning about art, contemporary art in Vancouver, at that time was quite rigid in a lot of ways, at least how I perceived it. There was a very kind of precise way of making work, or at least there was a sense that you had to be very responsible for sort of every element of what was going into your artwork, and able to explain it, basically, and be able to sort of almost quantify what you're doing. And I think that was actually really positive in a lot of ways. But then at a certain point, breaking that was also really positive. And when I got to Berlin, it was almost the antithesis of that. It was like people were just doing anything, without any kind of rationale behind it. So I think Berlin just kind of allowed me a little bit more freedom to kind of experiment and kind of do things without necessarily having the footnotes as to why I was doing them.
When was this? When did you move?
2008.
Okay. And you've been there ever since?
I have.
When, around that time, what was your practice like when you moved from Vancouver to Berlin? What were you focusing on at that time? Was it some of the earlier video works, DMT and things like that?
Yeah, DMT would be the kind of main one for sure. Which is maybe, there was quite a, it was quite a rigorous quite a rigorous sort of piece from the start, I think.
And we'll show some of those in a second here, actually, and maybe this is our transition to unpacking some of those influences and how it relates to some of those themes that we talked about, i.e. spirituality, religion, drugs, music, dance, and even skateboarding. We'll see some very early works that relate very directly to skateboarding. So maybe we'll start off with spirituality, if you want to talk about how that shows up in your life or how it did show up in your life, like in terms of how you maintain a spiritual practice or meditative practice.
Well, I was raised Catholic. So I would assume that's where that comes
religious.
from. That's the genesis of my sort of interest in spirituality, or I think interest in altered states in general comes from that, being brought up with religion.
Apropos to have this on the slide here, which is a newer work of yours.
It's true. And so, what was the question exactly?
Just about your history of your personal spirituality practice or religion.
Yeah, well, I think I kind of lost it with religion, or with Catholicism at least, in my early teens or even before that, and but still, had that Catholic guilt, and just sort of, I don't know, there was just something that was always present in my life, that there was, I don't know, this quest for something that went beyond the perceived reality. And so that carried on through high school in various ways and into college, etc. And I think at a certain point I became very interested in other people's spirituality and sort of these, and finding this universality to notions of spirituality and this kind of age-old human aspiration towards transcendence. And so that's kind of where things, I don't know, coalesced into an art practice, I think, in a way, or into a theme that it's going to stop.
No, but this is perfect. So this is all according to plan. So we're on this new work that will probably kill the lights in a second, but not right yet. But this is a new work of yours that I'd love for you to talk about. We just saw it transition the slides. This is on display right now at Bradley or Taskren in Montreal and might have just closed. But maybe talk to us about what this work is materially and then also conceptually.
Sure. This work is a votive candle stand, so it's very similar to what you would find in a Catholic church. It is consisting of, I think, 156 electric LED candles that, so on first viewing, it looks authentically like a stand from a Catholic church, and they flicker kind of intermittently at the beginning, quite randomly, a few of them, and then every few minutes, the candles start to engage in an animation, and it slowly evolves into this vortex, kind of inward sucking wormhole animation. That's accompanied by sound, and so this is like a very, very recent work, which is kind of it's me taking a lot of the themes and kind of concepts out of my films, I think, and applying them to physical media now, or attempting to sort of elicit a similar phenomenological response from physical works rather than from the moving image works, basically.
Can we watch a demo of this?
Sure,
Is that cool? Yeah.
We're jumping, we're like...
I know, we're jumping around.
Right to now.
But it's okay, yeah. So just give us a sec here as we configure the AV, but I can speak from experience having just gotten back from Montreal. The space in which it's shown right now is this bunker inside Bradley or Taskren. It's in the basement, so the sound is just bouncing off the walls. It's really hypnotizing.
I'm gonna jump it. I'll play it a bit forward so we don't have to watch the whole. So you see the. Is that?
Yep, we're good.
So yeah, random flickering, a few more.
I think I was down there for about 3 or 4 cycles, and I think Megan and Antoine thought I was lost or must have got stuck in the vortex. But it was incredible to see, and I think we'll probably do the lights right now. Yeah. Who did you collaborate with for the music, or was that something that you produced?
That was with Conrad Black,
Okay.
my best friend Todd. That we've worked on music together for many years. And where did that keynote go? There. Yeah, we work together on the films generally. He's a techno producer from here as well. He's from West Van, but lives in Berlin as well.
So yeah, the timeline's jumping around, but actually we're going to be talking about this work here under the psychedelics category. This is around the time that you moved from Vancouver to Berlin. Maybe tell us about the DMT project and 8-channel work.
Sure. DMT was a piece I made in 2000. Well, it started in 2001, but it didn't end up getting finished really until 2004. It was the first time it showed at the presentation house. So it was kind of my first, I guess, institutional solo show. So just up the street, or just down the street. DMT is it's an 8-channel video installation. I should just pause it on them in a second.
I can go back.
But it's basically, should we play a clip of that, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe give
Let's
some
do that,
context.
and I can talk over top of it.
Sure.
So it's,
Yes, thanks.
I just play this.
Is there audio with it?
Yes, but it's really quiet, because
Okay.
all you're listening to is everyone was wearing a lav microphone. So what you're watching is someone who's high on the hyper-hallucinogenic drug DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, which is a synthetic version of ayahuasca, basically, same compounds. And with this drug, what happens is when you smoke it, it hits you within about 30 seconds. So you go, and it's a extremely overwhelming kind of high. So you go from being sober to literally having your mind blown, really higher than you'll ever be in your life, within about 30 seconds. And then it lasts for between 6 and 10 minutes, 6 and 12 minutes. And in a similar way, when you come down from it, it kind of leaves your body within about a minute. So you go from being sober to higher than you've ever been to sober again over the course of 12 to 15 minutes, basically. Yeah, and it's a really incredibly overwhelming high. People report death of ego experiences, complete loss of sense of self, and et cetera. So what you're watching here is the subject high on the drugs, and the only instructions they were given was that when they started to regain consciousness or come back to their normal reality, was to start trying to explain it to the camera, trying to put into words what the experience was like. and so that's where you realize that language really failed to elucidate these experiences. And you get this. Actually, Tyler's is actually quite lucid compared to a lot of people's, but it was really, yeah. So it's, yeah. Everyone. It was shot all under the same parameters. Everybody chose their own music, had a lav microphone, and just this one instruction basically. And so that's it.
And it was an 8-channel work. There was about, how many people were doing it? Was it 8 people? Or
there was
more?
8. I mean, I shot 30 different people.
Okay.
So it was kind of a big survey, really, and then ended up with 8 for the installation. And yeah, there's all sorts of similarities in people's experiences. That's another really interesting thing about this drug, is that it has these kind of commonalities to people's experiences. Yeah.
And is it? This shows how little I know about it. But is it an addictive drug, or is it?
No.
No. Okay.
No. It's it's a synthesized drug, but it has a similar kind of property, or kind of, I think, quality as the sort of medicinal shamanistic drugs, in that you do it once, and that's really a lot. It's a lot to take in, and you don't necessarily pine for it,
Because at some point in time, I imagine you probably stopped participating in this. I mean, this is the only work that I know of that you've done this type of research or participation for, but that, to me, that's evident of how you immerse yourself in these works, and also you collaborate a lot with many folks, seemingly on every project. I think the next section we'll talk about is music, and I think we can probably bring the lights back because there's no video for this. But I'd love to know your influences in music. Obviously, you mentioned Conrad, one of the people that you collaborate with for your music as well, but maybe talk to me about some of your early musical influences and how that relates to your practice.
Well, music has always been like potentially more inspiring than art in a lot of ways to me. It's kind of the core. Oh yeah, that's what he was listening to. I think music was sort of my first inspiration. My first kind of love was music, and yeah.
Any artist in particular?
Well, yeah, David Bowie definitely was. Ever since I think, I had another babysitter down the street who was next door neighbors to Charles Van Sandwyk, a guy named Jeff Brenningham, who was, I think, maybe a little bit younger, but he was a big Bowie fan. And so when he would babysit me, he would play Bowie records. We would play Bowie records, and that was like my in, really, for that. And that was about 6 years old, I think. I remember him going off to the concert, and I was really jealous. And then he moved away, and he came back the next summer. And I was so psyched to talk to him about David Bowie, and he totally moved on. He was like, he's all right. Yeah.
You don't move on from Bowie?
He was totally like, yeah, he's okay. And he had like a Duran Duran shirt on or something.
Oh, that's too bad to hear.
So that was a huge influence on me at that age, was Bowie, and continues to be, I guess. But music was, like, I was a very precocious music listener back then. And during high school, in the 90s, it was a time when you were supposed to kind of choose a lane, and kind of, you listened to hip hop, or you listened to punk, or you listened to, or you raved or whatever. But I was always totally dabbling in all of it, and really in places I wasn't supposed to be, I guess, at the time. And yeah, it remains a massive part of my practice. I think music is always heavily taken into consideration when I'm making films, and even a lot of the physical works, I think, are inspired by music in a sense.
When you work with music in your art, when you collaborate with Conrad or whoever it may be, do you aim to elicit any sort of specific emotions or sensations, or is it kind of sort of a soundtrack to the piece, so to speak?
I think it's case to case, but oftentimes, like with the most recent, the last 10 years of making films, music is generally used in these, these works have kind of gained a kind of, or they have a real dramaturgy to them, and there's always a moment where I'm attempting to kind of elicit a similar response from the viewer to that of the people on the screen, or the subjects, and so music is always a huge factor in that. So it's quite manipulative, I think, in a lot of ways.
When was the last time you produced music? You mentioned that you were working on music in Emily Carr era with a sampler. Are you still making music at all?
With Conrad.
Okay,
yeah. But not like for its own sake so much these days, unfortunately. I just don't find the time. But we made, like, if people saw the show at the Polygon last year, the big Conrad did all the internal soundtracks within the films, and then we made the big song together, and that, that was like, that's a good example of like, really manipulating for a phenomenological effect, basically.
Let's next transition into film, or more specifically science fiction, which is ever present in your work, especially in this quantification trilogy, phase-shifting index. Talk about one film in particular, Altered States, which came out in 1980, the influence of that film in your work. I see it materially, I see it very literally in some of the transition sequences, but talk about that film and why it was so important. Or if it was important, maybe I'm wrong.
It was very much. I think I saw it in high school. Well, I did see it in high school for the first time. And I think a lot of it was beyond me. I think the thing that's most engaging about that film to me, it's a movie from 1980 about a guy who's taking psychedelic mushrooms. He's a scientist, and he's taking psychedelic mushrooms and going into flotation tanks and experiencing sensory deprivation while really high on psychedelic mushrooms. And there's a lot of science, like hard science within it. There's a lot of actual factual science, and then there's a lot of sort of speculation on altered states and on evolution, et cetera, within it. And I think it really blew my mind, that film, like the way that it was Ken Russell who directed it, and the way he was able to kind of combine like really hard science with science fiction and with psychedelia and horror. It's a body horror film at this core, really. Something about that amalgamation, it really stuck with me and really influenced me in a lot of ways, I think.
Do you think it's aged well? I mean, has it?
Yeah, super well. I mean, there's a part where he devolves into a chimpanzee while he's having his experience.
It's a trip.
That part, he's kind of like, he's devolving every time he goes back there and kind of going back to primordial man. And so there's this scene where he gets out of the tank and he runs around like a chimpanzee, and he ends up eating a lamb in the zoo or something. So that part is it's super camp. It's Ken Russell, who's like a very camp director. But I think it's aged incredibly well. I would recommend watching it, definitely.
I think the film, I was doing a bit of research, and it's inspired by John C. Lilly, who's known for inventing the isolation tank, sensory deprivation. So when you watch the film, you'll see...
Speaking with dolphins.
Dolphins?
The reason he was kind of like discounted from science was because he believed he could speak to dolphins, and he ended up he lived in a house that had dolphin, like it had like dolphin, like literally had aquariums kind of built into the house where dolphins were swimming.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Maybe that's your next installation, dolphins. Okay, so the next theme is dance. There's a number of works. Variation FQ comes to mind. I Can See Forever. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to cue up any of those, or
just keep playing this.
Yeah, we can put it back on the slideshow, I guess.
Sure.
But for those, of course, that watched Phase Shifting Index at the Polygon, you would have seen 7 different groups, made-up groups of various different eras of civilization that were all participating in some form of dance or ritual. So maybe talk a little bit about how dance shows up, or how choreography functions as a form of transcendence, or a theme in your work.
Well, I think dance is, next to prayer and drugs and meditation, et cetera, it's one of the kind of most common forms of attempting to elicit some type of phenomenal, some type of catharsis, some type of cathartic activity. So it's something I've always been drawn to. I mean, I love, and it goes hand in hand with music. It's very, very simple to me, but and it's something that's just kind of gotten more and more important in my films. I think is the body and dancing, but and that's been quite a natural evolution. I mean, I made a video in 2007 here in North Vancouver. I shot it in 2005. But it's boys at a straight edge hardcore show dancing. So it goes all the way back. Well, and even 2001. So, anyways, but I mean,
it evolved into you actually collaborating with choreographers and.
Yeah, I mean, I think it started like a lot of my work started as documenting things that were actually in existence, and then taking this kind of primary material and producing secondary material from it. And now it's kind of gotten to a place where I'm producing the material.
I'm pausing it here because we're talking about this next. Sorry to interrupt. Okay, so yeah, we'll come back to dance and more
We're
specifically.
all over the place.
We're all over the place. It's good. We'll come back to collaboration towards the end of this talk, but I wanted to pinpoint this as the last theme within. There are probably many other themes that I'm missing out on, but skateboarding was one when you and I were chatting a couple days ago, sort of a kinship background, our love of skateboarding, and of course Vancouver is pretty well regarded internationally as a skateboarding scene. Talk about this work, which is an older work, and perhaps how skateboarding influenced some of your other work.
Well, this work specifically is from 2001, directly out of, basically just after art school. So, yeah, skateboarding was still a big part of my life at that point. I mean, I wasn't really doing it so much anymore, but it had a huge influence on me, skateboarding and the culture around skateboarding and the kind of the precociousness of skateboard culture. And so this is a work from 2001 where Vancouver is very, very well known in the skateboard world for producing some of the best skateboarders and having some of the best spots in the city. And it was also one of the first cities in the world to introduce skate stopping devices on the architecture. And so, so all these places that were kind of made famous in the magazines and the videos all of a sudden were annihilated by these, new amendments to the architecture. So this was a series I did where I went around the 5 most famous spots in the city that had been capped, was what we used to call it, and shot these sequences just like you would see in a skateboard magazine of somebody doing a trick down this hand railing, but with the empty rail. So the frame is empty basically of the skateboarder, and so it was very kind of early photoconceptual work, I suppose.
It was, in photoconceptualism at that time was certainly at its peak, I guess, or it was having a moment. So it makes sense. And if anyone's ever looked through Transworld or Thrasher, this is a familiar look. You'd of course have a skateboarder probably doing a trick down the handrail or over it. But maybe talk about how you feel like skateboarders see the world differently. Like they would see this set of stairs differently than maybe someone walking on the street. The sort of creative nature of being a skateboarder.
Yeah, well, architecture is your,
playground.
Yeah, your medium. So it does kind of give you this kind of observant kind of quality, which I think is really amazing. And when you're a kid, to become that aware of your surroundings, actually, it's like a situationist kind of thing. So that's something to this day. I can't go by a ledge without seeing if it's skatable, or I'll notice wax on any curb anywhere. Like
judging the grade of every bump, thinking, can 100%, I do a trick off
like
that?
Just no matter what, like where I am in the world.
Me too.
It's something that's ingrained in me, and I haven't been on a skateboard in some years.
And then I remember my knees are 40 years old. Let's talk a little bit about experimentation. I'll just start the loop again here. I'd love to know how you're currently conducting research and examples of how you're actively doing research. You had mentioned that you've got an ongoing meditative practice. You've done the silent retreat. Like, can you talk about some of these concrete examples about ongoing practices, research?
Like personal research.
Yes.
About myself, what I do.
Well, about your art.
Well, I mean, I've always been a kind of a, participant and voyeur, like in a lot of ways, or kind of skeptical spiritualist. But I have a meditation practice, yes, that I've had for some years, 20 minutes in the morning. But I recently did a Vipassana retreat, which is what you're referring to, which is like a 10-day silent, no talking, no reading, no writing, meditating for 10 hours a day retreat in in Germany, right on the edge of the Czech border, which was interesting because I found that I was really in this mode of like being totally into it, but then also being super critical of it at the same time. So that's something I kind of deal with a lot in terms of that side of my research, is that I'm engaging, but I'm also outside of it a lot of the time. It's hard to fully commit.
Would you say that was an effective retreat then? I mean, it feels like you were kind of partly there for work, partly there for personal reasons.
Unfortunate circumstances, really. But it was it was intense. I don't know if it was effective. It was really gnarly. Like, it was one of the craziest things I've ever done. Like, sitting for 2 hours at a time in, you know, half lotus position, you get incredible pain, like incredible torturous pain. So you've just learned a new meditation technique, and you're trying to focus on that, but you're really, you know, in pain. So it was
Sounds awesome.
It was rewarding in the sense that, like,
right,
you get over that, and you're
that's the goal.
Quite happy with yourself.
And at the end of it, you're like, you got 10,000 text messages or whatever.
Yeah, well, that, exactly. You fall very quickly back into, you know,
into
you
your
open
habits.
very quickly.
Speaking of technology, actually, and we'll at some point play a clip from Liminals, but wanted to talk to you about working with unusual or outmoded technology as a way of sort of visualizing transcendence. You obviously produced the phase shifting index, which we all saw, the sort of climax at the end where all 7 sequences sync up, and there's this technique called data moshing. But whether it's using Kirlian photography or data moshing, maybe talk to me a little bit about those techniques and how it relates to the perception of transcendence in your work, like more technically about those.
Well, I mean, from all the way from the start, really, I've oftentimes employed outmoded media, like, as the way. I think initially just because I was scared of resolution. Like, I never liked digital cameras. They were always, something about them felt too real to me in a way. I don't know. There was something about them that I found off-putting. And so I was oftentimes working with, like, high 8 video, Super 8, things like this. But that progressed into a way in the later works, or maybe the mid-era, using these outmoded medias was a way to kind of
blur the timelines, maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely a way to kind of offset, you know, create a kind of uncertainty around the data production, but also to kind of lure the viewer into some sort of sense of familiarity, and kind of be able to then subvert that and be able to then twist that kind of, that sort of familiarity with the, you know, when you watch a 16 millimeter film that looks like a documentary, you don't question it generally. It's something, it's the historiosity of the media kind of gives it this kind of instant veracity in most people's minds. And so I started using that as this way to be able to then really twist things, I think. And then in terms of the actual visualization is what you're talking about, I think, like using data moshing and things like that. That's something that's come much later. I think these early works were about altered states, you know. So much art is about something. And then I think there came a moment where I wanted to somehow sort of inflict that, and, you know, sort of be able to elicit this phenomenological response from people. And that's where these shifts in medium come, where I'm using VHS and then all of a sudden it rips into a digital kind of rupture of some sort.
And technically speaking, that's when you're more or less corrupting the files to sequences that are mashed together. One is borrowing a frame from the previous sequence. Like, we'll see an example, I think, in later down the slideshow, but it's basically you're damaging the file. Is
data moshing? Yeah, data moshing is the effect, if you've seen my works before, oftentimes they will go from a 16 millimeter black and white or VHS film, and all of a sudden there'll be a rupture, and it goes into this sort of digital chaos. And data moshing is what he's referring to, which is it's an error where one keyframe is basically removed, and if you're editing a sequence of images, the last image from before the edit stays, and the next image kind of imprints itself on that and kind of drags and it's what you see when something's not downloading properly on your computer and starts dragging. So I always, when I first started seeing that, you know, I don't know, when did we start witnessing that? 2000, early 2000s?
Like the Napster era kind of thing?
Yeah, like when you started downloading films and they had this kind of, and to me it was the first time I felt like I was actually seeing a really valid visualization of a psychedelic experience. And so that was something that we took in and sort of amplified with these works and really kind of.
How did you reverse engineer that? Because what you're witnessing in that case of downloading a video file and it's corrupted, like, how did you know how to technically achieve that? Or was that, you didn't necessarily
I work with people.
Yeah, exact. Collaboration. A very important theme. So maybe can we show a sequence from Liminals and perhaps an example of what data moshing looks like?
I will play a very hyper. Should I play this edit of the film?
Sure. Yeah, we'll do another video here, Meredith. Thanks.
So this is I made a trilogy of films before Phase Shifting Index that you guys saw. That was sort of the apotheosis of this trilogy of short films I made called the Quantification Trilogy, which all employ a kind of outmoded verite aesthetic. So they look like documentaries from the past, but they're set in the future. The narrator is always telling you they're in the future. So it's kind of this cognitive dissonance is created just in the sort of setup of all these. So I'm going to play like a really, they're all about 30 minutes long, but I'll play a 5-minute kind of mega mix of one of them to show you.
The most radical and compelling of these groups speculates that a specific paraspace could serve as a transitory zone for humanity. An intermediate area between the physical and the virtual, where a generative incubation period towards our next phase in evolution could take place. They refer to this paraspace as the liminal. Instituted since the singularity disaster of 2033, liminals capitalized on the recently lifted ban on the use of machine DNA by injecting incremental doses of the pre-programmed nanotechnological cells directly into the inferior temporal gyres of their brains, the area responsible for our pre-quantification conceptions of fate. Liminal's co-option of spiritual ritual is without hierarchy or privilege. It is based solely on the prior capacity of acts to incite transcendental experience in pre-quantification practitioners. Although theatrical by circumstance, the commitment in often extreme corporeal gestures lies in reaching as near to total abandon as possible. These appropriations aspire to resurrect the ancestral physiology of neurological faith and are carried out with utmost sincerity.
Yeah, lights on is great. Thanks.
Yeah, that was, pardon me, that was very condensed. It's a 35-minute or 30-minute film usually.
And I noticed, going back to DMT, when you talked about language, it seems in this video and in other videos that you've done, the actors, the subjects are not speaking English, they're speaking what is just gibberish. Why do you do that? Why are you eliminating the English language at this point?
Well, that was like something that happened totally organically. The first of that trilogy was a film called Quickeners, and it was actually, it's the way this whole sort of process evolved, was that that's the only one that's actually using real archival material. We haven't seen it, but so it was. I found this Verite film from. I didn't find it. There's a 1967 Verite film called Holy Ghost People. That's about a sect of Pentecostal Christian snake handlers in West Virginia that I found a 60 millimeter copy of and had scanned. And what I did was I took that film and reworked it into this science fiction narrative set 500 years in the future. But everyone in the film is speaking English, and I wanted it to be, I didn't want them to be speaking English. So we devised a way to basically manipulate the language so that they were no longer speaking English, but it was lip-synced, so that I could then subtitle it. And I found that so effective, like what was going on there, this kind of, again, this dissonance between what you're reading and what you're seeing, that I then continued using that in the next two films, and then into Phase Shifting Index as well. So it's kind of, it even goes back to DMT. Well, it's this kind of crisis of translation. You're sort of semi-understanding what's going on, but it's not aligning, and it creates this really kind of strange, dissonance.
One final question for me. We will do audience Q&A in a second, so get your questions ready. And I repeat, we'll do questions. We'll try to get as many as we can. You collaborate with many folks. It almost seems like every single work that we've seen involves collaboration with Conrad, with fabricators, with other filmmakers, dancers. What's the importance of collaboration in your work, and how do you manage that as the artist, the one that has the name associated with it, in terms of sort of pulling the strings as a director? Like, how much autonomy do you give these? In the case of Liminals, how much autonomy did you give the dancers or the performers? Well, how hands-on were you?
I work with a choreographer in that film, and in Phase Shifting Index, I work with the choreographers very closely, which is really, really important, because when you're working with people in situations that extreme, those dancers, like, they're really going those depths. They're really going to these kind of, really cathartic places. And I'm not a dancer. I'm not from that world. So Justin Kennedy, and Emma House, my choreographers, the choreographers I work with, they really act as a median between me and the dancers, and this kind of immediate trust is granted when you're working with someone like that. So it's I can't stress enough how important that is. So, but it's case to case. Like Conrad and I work very, very closely, and have for many, many years, and sort of know what we want. But it's always a different story. When you're outsourcing a prism to be made. When I make these, I work with a company who make like display stands, for, I don't know, automotive shops or something. So making fine art is not really in their vocabulary. So it's always it can be a real learning curve, and a real sort of, intense process.
Trial and error.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually have one more question. I lied. So final question for me is there a medium or a form of media that you haven't yet explored that would excite you, that you want to try? I mean, this altar piece at Bradley or Taskren feels like a new venture. Is there anything new on your mind that you've wanted to try and maybe just haven't found the right collaborator?
Feature film.
Okay. We can make that happen. That's a good moment to pause on, and hopefully we do see a feature film from you. Is there any questions in the audience? Please raise your hand, and I'll repeat the question for the recording here if you do have a question. If not, we can socialize, but yes.
I have experienced, some of Jeremy's look back to the snakes, and so on, and I know, and the prisms and so on. And I know the influence on me, and I guess at the influence on participants. But I wonder about your art on you. What's the influence of your art on this stuff?
Like if I watch it? Well, I think when I'm making it, it can get quite... I do all the editing myself as well, so I get very, very immersed in it, and very... and so I think I also work very musically, I think, and very rhythmically, and very... I work, ad nausea, like on these kind of edits. So I think there is a point where I can feel that it's working, you know, like if it is working on me still after, you know, spending however many weeks and weeks with it, I feel like it's, yeah, there you go. I feel like it's there. I think is that what you're asking? But I mean, it's funny. Like I haven't watched these films in a long time, but we just installed Phase Shifting Index in Berlin, and it's quite a headache to put that show together. You know, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of things, but when it was up, I remembered why. Like basically.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask about collaboration. You're talking about how when you were in Vancouver, contemporary art was very rigid, and then you moved to Berlin, it's kind of soft and opening up. Do you think that is a personal maturing, or do you think that there's something to say about working with other people at a younger age? Do you think you need to go through the path of thinking everything's very serious and doing everything on your own when you're young, and then being open to working with when you're older?
It could be, yeah. I mean, I think when I was in art school, I wasn't taking much advice from people. You know, I wasn't very interested in other people's opinions. It was just like, this is how I'm doing it. Even, yeah. But, and so therefore felt this kind of overwhelming, what I felt like was control in the way that I was being told to make work. But is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Well, yeah, just when you went to Berlin, did you feel that part of yourself was open to working with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that city did a lot to me in general. You know, it was a really formative moment. You know, moving from a city like Vancouver, which is really beautiful and has many great things going for it, but is lacking the abundance of culture that a place like Berlin has, and the kind of forward-thinking nature of the amount of people who are kind of feel like they're on the same page as you in a lot of ways, and that was really revelatory for me, as well as the fact that, you know, there was space and it was so affordable there that there was also time. You know, that city granted you time basically, which was, so I think it was really, yeah, circumstantially for me, that move was massive, and yeah, I can't necessarily pinpoint exactly why, but you know, whether that was age or just the right moment, but it did feel like some kind of pressure was lifted, like when I went there.
Do one more question if there's anything else. Ron.
I'm familiar if your object practice and your films are created separately, or do you use images from your films? How do you, are they, I mean, obviously they're related, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think the films are kind of what comes naturally to me in a way. Like I think in moving image, I think in sound and moving image, and so when I'm making objects, it's a more challenging process for me, but it's something I find almost more rewarding in a way. But I think with the objects, I'm oftentimes trying to take, you know, these films are messy. They're full of everything I want to be in there. They're full of so many different ideologies and ideas and yeah, whatever strategies. And when I make objects, I feel like I'm taking sort of smaller concepts from those films and sort of amplifying or kind of putting them under a much stronger lens to sort of, yeah, somehow, yeah, amplify certain elements that are kind of caught in the alchemy of the film works. And so they're totally related and totally always running in tandem. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to linger. We have a little bit of a mixer remaining here, so Jeremy, thank you again for coming, and have a great time in Ottawa. November's a great time to be in Ottawa, I've heard. But thank you again for this, and thanks, Gortz Gallery, for hosting us.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.